Good morning. I'm Laura Lafayette. I have the privilege of serving as the CEO of the Richmond Association of Realtors, and this morning I have the honor of welcoming you all here on the beautiful campus of Virginia Union University. I want to run through a few thanks, a few opening comments, and then turn it over to I would say my partner in crime, my evil twin. People would wonder who's the evil in this relationship, Greta. It's a 50-50. It's all 50-50. So first and foremost, I want to thank the Mayor Stoney. Thank you for coming into office with the vision of One Richmond and recognizing that our housing challenges are one of the reasons that we are not yet One Richmond, but that possibility, that opportunity does exist. So very early on, the mayor said, I want to have a summit. I want to walk out of that summit with a plan to move forward. So thank you. This room would not be packed to the gills if it wasn't for you. So thank you very much. I want to thank again the folks at Virginia Union University for hosting us, very gracious host. I want to thank the leadership of the Richmond Community Development Alliance. When we were casting about for an entity under which we could hold this summit, the leadership of RCDA stepped up and said, yes, that's fine, we'll do that. So thank you to the Richmond Community Development Alliance. I want to thank the Summit Planning Committee. This kind of effort doesn't happen with just a couple of people. It takes an awful lot of folks. So if you were on the Summit Planning Committee, would you please stand and be recognized? Thank you very much. So a couple of people have said, well, why are you and Greta doing this? Well, the answer is we didn't back off the line fast enough. And so we looked at each other and we do what we always do. We shrugged. We said, okay, we can do that. And then we went back to our staff and we begged them and they said, okay, what did you say this time? What did you get us into this time? And then our staff rolled up their sleeves and did great, great work. So I want to thank the staff of the Better Housing Coalition and the Richmond Association of Realtors, and I specifically want to thank Channy Franco, who's in the back. Raise your hand, Channy. Channy is the logistical magician on our staff, and she made this happen. So thank you, Channy. I would not want or could not do this without you. And most of all, I want to thank each and every one of you for coming out. Time, I believe, is our most precious resource because it's finite. I've been reminded of that very, very starkly in the last couple of days, unfortunately. But because it is finite, because it's limited, because there are so many demands on it, it is so precious. So that you would just decide to spend time with us today and loan us your talents, your abilities, we are humbled and we are deeply grateful. If you look around this room, we are a diverse group, and that's with great intention. So please make sure you're at the table that you were assigned. I am now ready to do my daughter's wedding receptions because I have spent a lot of time on these table assignments. And that's why I think I'm starting an elopement fund, but that's me. Anyway, so the purpose of our diversity, the reason to bring together a diverse crowd is because we are richer and stronger because of our diversity. And it's something to be celebrated. But of all the differences that we have and all the things that bring us together, what I hope we are united in today is the common conviction that everyone, every citizen in Richmond deserves an opportunity to flourish. And if we believe that, then we have to be about creating an environment in which that opportunity is an actual possibility. So with that, I will again turn it over to my colleague, my friend. She stretches me and then she grounds me and says it's going to be all good. It's been an honor to do this with you, Greta.
Good morning. I look out over this room and it's nothing but love in the room here. Lots of good friends that have been fighting in the fields with us for quite a long time to make a positive difference in our community. I'm going to thank Heather Crisplet at home for introducing me to a video clip with a conference that they did a few weeks ago that I think does a really good job of helping to set the context for why we are here today and why we are trying to address the challenges and I dare say opportunities that we have as a community by working together. And with that, I'm going to ask the gentleman in the room behind the closed doors to please play the video. It's only about 4 minutes, and I just ask that you please pay attention to this.
Tim Wise. Tim has spent the past 20 years speaking about anti-racism to audience in all 50 states in America. Does a lot of work with colleges and students, and high school students throughout America. And he has authored 6 books, including the highly acclaimed White Like Me, Reflections on Race from a Privileged Son. Why don't you guys welcome our panel today. So, I get a chance to pretend I'm Oprah today and, you know, engage you guys in a conversation, as I indicated, about race in America, about equality in America. Let me start. Tim, you have written a book about this subject from a different perspective. What are your thoughts, opening thoughts about where we are in America right now?
Well, you know, in the 3 minutes, 3 to 5 that we've been given, I'll do my best to answer it, and I know we're going to get deeper into this conversation as we go, so I'll save some of what I want to talk about for that. But I really appreciate the way that you framed the discussion at the outset, because at least on 2 occasions I heard you reference something that we really don't do very much in this country, and that is you referenced systemic racism, and you referred to it in that way. And I think that's important. In fact, it's critical, not just for the National League of Cities effort, but for our conversation as a country, because too often what we do, and I think we all know this, is we look at racism as that thing that happened in Charleston. That is to say, and when I say that thing that happened, I'm not talking about the generations of institutional racism, I'm talking about the thing that happened this summer. We look at that as racism. We say, well, Dylann Roof walks into a church and massacres 9 people, and the city comes together, and the state comes together, and the country grieves, and that's racism. And then we sort of wash our hands of it, because we say, well, thankfully, that doesn't happen every week. That doesn't happen all the time. That's an anomaly. But we have to be prepared to look at racism as something that's far deeper than that, and not about bigotry, not about overt hatred, and not just about that type of random retail violence, because that's retail violence. We've got wholesale violence. And by that, I mean, if you're going to understand what happened in Baltimore in the last 6 months, you cannot start with Freddie Gray, and you cannot start even with the police department in Baltimore. You have to start with the fact that that is a community that was wrecked by so-called urban renewal. That was violence. When they come in and they put the interstate through your community, and they knock down your business, and they knock down your apartments, and they make folks huddled into small crowded housing, and they essentially lock them in a holding pen. I mean, we talk about housing and education, we talk about neighborhoods as if it's not about racism. We act like folks just ended up where they ended up. But let's be clear, this thing that we in this country call the ghetto, that was created, and it wasn't created by black people, and it wasn't created by poor people. It was created by folks who were usually not black and definitely not poor as a holding pen for the people they didn't want to live amongst them. So we have to be prepared to call that violence. If you don't call zoning laws and redlining violence, even though it does violence, and you don't call it racism, then how are we going to solve that? So I want us to frame this conversation the way that you've done it. And I think that's where we are as a country. We're still stuck in this mode of describing racism as this interpersonal thing, rather than understanding it structurally and institutionally. And I think until we get to that place where we can talk about not just that individual cop who does something wrong in the community, which we can see plenty of examples of that, but until we deal with the mentality that says that spatial isolation, segregation, residential isolation, black and brown kids going to schools 12 times more likely to be places of concentrated poverty, that's not an accident. People didn't choose that. And so I think that's where we need to go, is to frame the conversation in a way that reminds us that we're talking about systemic and structural violence. And we can't just talk about the sort of retail level stuff, as important as that is, and as horrific as a hate crime is. You know, to be really honest, at the risk of being hyperbolic, aspects of this country's history have been an intergenerational hate crime against certain people. And that's just the truth. We don't like to use language like that. Sounds un-American, unpatriotic, whatever kind of terminology we use, but that's real. And unless we're prepared to do it that way and have that conversation that way, I'm afraid we'll keep spinning our wheels, coming back, having the same conversations over and over and over again. The reason that low-income black folks were the ones hit hardest in New Orleans was not an accident. And what was stunning to me about it, and I lived there for 10 years, the only people that were shocked by what happened, for the most part, were white folks. Black folks weren't shocked that they got uprooted. They weren't shocked that they got left behind and forgotten. That was the history of that community, right? Urban renewal did that. Interstate highway construction right through the Treme, the oldest free black neighborhood in this country, did that. And so it was just same thing, different day. A little bit more extreme when the cameras were on. And they made movies about it. But it was the same stuff that had always been happening. So we have to go back to that systemic understanding, which is something I think the movement historically knew, but most of our leaders have sometimes forgotten.
Wow.
Wow. I'd like to think that only New Orleans was a victim of systemic racism, but we've had some here in RVA. Redlining that started almost 100 years ago that said communities of color were too high risk to invest in. A 10-lane I-95 highway that went through Carver, Jackson Ward, Navy Hill, that doesn't exist anymore. Navy Hill sits under the biotech park. Urban renewal with Fulton and Randolph, whole neighborhoods torn down. Public housing placement, 2,000 units in one neighborhood in the East End. The others located in communities of color in the mid-50s. Redistricting, both for political gerrymandering, for political districts as well as school districts, and even comparison between the crack and opioid drug epidemic just because of the demographic changes in who's addicted to narcotics. But there's an opportunity for us today, the first day of a new reality for RVA and specifically for the city of Richmond to do things a little differently. I've lived here for 25 years, and this is the most vibrant that I've ever seen my city. We have new businesses moving here. We have corporate headquarters wanting to be here. I believe I saw in the paper over the weekend that the Central Virginia region has the second largest job growth, only to Northern Virginia. We are on the best of lists everywhere, internationally. We have restaurants and breweries that are just, bubbling over, winning all sorts of awards. We actually have population growth that is happening for the first time in the city in quite some time. I volunteered at the Folk Festival. Over 100,000 people of all nationalities, all backgrounds, coming together to celebrate. It's one of the best things that Richmond does. It's a pretty cool time to be in Richmond. And the quality of life for most is fantastic, but it's not for all. And I think today we're hoping, with your help, with your talent, with your passion for our community, that we will be able to work together to make a plan so that all citizens, regardless of their economic status, regardless of their race, regardless of their ethnicity, has an opportunity to thrive. That's what we're working on doing here. So when Laura and I were asked to lead this effort, we thought, okay, we can pull together 25 or 30 people to come together and to dream and map out this plan. And then once the announcement was made that we were going to have this summit, our phones and emails started blowing up and everybody wanted to be here. So be careful for what you ask for, because now you have work to do today. And I'm going to leave you with 3 things to think about as you go about doing your work. One is leave your turf at home, and that goes to philanthropy, trade associations of realtors and developers, nonprofits who have different missions, faith leaders, quasi-governmental departments, city departments. Leave your turf at home. This is not about you, it's about us as a community, working together to try to create pathways of opportunity and hope for all. Number 2, please have a sense of urgency about how important this work is right now. How many of you have children? Raise your hand. Grandchildren, raise your hand. Nieces and nephews, raise your hand. Cute neighbors running around, raise your hand. Get that image in your head. Now imagine them laying in a field with a sheet over them and a bullet hole in their chest, and yellow police tape wrapped around the area, blue lights flashing, and screams like a bad Halloween horror movie going on because you've lost someone that you love. For too many of our neighbors, that's a reality, way too often. So it's not about us getting in our cars and going on about our lives. We need to do something now. Now. We need action now. And thirdly, please bring your political will to stand behind our elected officials to be courageous leaders. What is needed, whatever strategies we lay out today, is going to be great. It's not rocket science. Most of you have seen these strategies before because we've been talking about it for years. The difference is that we need money to fuel the implementation of whatever strategies that we decide upon together. And I mean big money, sustained money, dedicated money. And what we need our elected officials to do is to be courageous, to endure the short-term pain that will inevitably come doing something that people don't want, for the long-term gain so that all of our citizens have an opportunity to thrive. And so, how much are you individually willing to give up so that all of our neighbors have an opportunity for access to hope and success as they define it? That's what our work is about today, and I'm excited to be here. And I couldn't imagine a more courageous leader than our mayor, who is leading this charge for us to make a transformational difference for the 1 in 4 neighbors who are rooted in poverty, who have intellect, who have dreams and desires just like each and every one of us. They want a better quality of life. Working together, we can make that happen. Mayor Stoney.
Well, good morning, everyone. Oh, it's not that early. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. I want to express my thanks to, first with Virginia Union for hosting this. I also want to express my thanks to Greta and Laura Lafayette for taking up the task of leading this charge and putting the summit, helping put the summit together this morning. Also, I want to thank the planning team. Without you all, this would not happen today. And being dedicated to the cause takes a lot of work, a lot of extra hours in your day, and you all were so devoted to do such. And I want to thank all who are in this room. Thank you for sharing your talent with us today. I would be remiss if I did not recognize, I don't know whether or not they're here or not, Joe DeFelice and the HUD, our HUD Regional Administrator, and also Matthew Hunter, the Assistant Secretary for Field Policy and Management. Joe and Matthew visited with me yesterday in my office to talk about how HUD can strengthen our partnership with the City of Richmond, and I'm glad you were with us this morning. Thank you all for being here with us. So there are about 150 of us gathered this morning, so there are at least 150 reasons, if not more, for why we're here. And while we all have our individual motivations for being present, I hope there is one reason that unites us. We are all desperately wanting to build a one Richmond. We want to live in a city and in a region in which the size of our wallet and the color of our skin don't set the trajectory of our lives. We want to live in Richmond with safe and healthy neighborhoods, good schools, and affordable housing, jobs that allow us to take care of ourselves and our loved ones. And we want a transit system that connects all of these, whether you live in Chesterfield, Richmond, Henrico, and beyond. Simply put, we're here today because we want Richmond to be a place where each person has a fair shot at making the most of their God-given talents. Frankly, it is fair to say we're not there yet. Likely not even close. The challenges faced by the poor and downtrodden in our city reflect decades of intentional, institutional racism and discrimination that has disenfranchised a large segment of our population. They have done more to hold the flesh and blood of our city back more than any bronze and granite has in our time. Our deteriorated public housing communities and our unequal schools are living in lethal monuments to our segregated past and present. To be segregated is to be separated. And because of our housing policies, funding decisions, and transportation patterns, thousands of our neighbors remain without locational, educational, and vocational choice. I pursued a life in public service to right some historic wrongs and give a voice to the voiceless. And as an entire city, we must give voice to our present realities and accept the responsibility of unshackling this and all the future generations from the bondage and trauma of generational poverty. This is the moral challenge of our time. But we must do it, and we can do it, because our present should not be our future. And that is why we are here today, to chart the path forward. But it's not enough just to lay out the path we should follow. True transformation isn't accomplished overnight or in several decades. It will take time, a lot of time, but it will never come about unless we step up and step out boldly. So we can do it, but it must be done collectively. It's no accident that in this room there are folks from both the public and private sectors, residents of our neighborhoods, faith leaders, philanthropists, real estate developers, and nonprofits which seek to build a human capital and affordable housing. This effort requires all of us. And I repeat, all of us. We must do this all together. So we can do it, but not with an either-or approach, but rather a commitment to a both-and strategy. We must address and fund the needs of both our neighborhoods and our schools. We must seek greater efficiencies in the connectivity in our public transit, while at the same time building the most effective workforce preparedness programs possible. This both-and approach must be joined with a first things first attitude. And first on the agenda must be the transformation of public housing, the reduction and deconcentration of poverty, and the creation of economically integrated, healthy communities. Why? Because housing is foundational. Residents should not have to choose between housing that is affordable and housing that is safe and decent. Our current model of isolating our lowest income residents into aging structures simply does not work. These neighborhoods too often have been cauldrons of violence and trauma rather than launch pads for success. And we wonder why our schools struggle and why climbing the ladder to economic self-sufficiency is so incredibly difficult that sometimes it feels impossible, and more often than not, it's hopeless. So we need change, but we need change done the right way. That means we have to put the needs and interests of our residents front and center in this process. Many residents are understandably fearful of change. They wonder, what's going to happen to me? My commitment is that we will do everything we possibly can to ensure no resident is left worse off in this transformation. That means providing concrete support to residents at every phase of this process, building on the model of the family transition coaches now working with our residents in Creighton Court. And it means expanding access to workforce development, recreation, and after-school programs. We can't just move people around like pieces on a chessboard and hope to improve their situation. Nor can we rely on bricks and mortar approaches alone to bring real change to our neighborhoods. Rather, we also have to commit to bring new resources to our underserved communities, to provide support to families to find more or better employment, to strengthen the supports available to children, and to prepare families to be successful in improved housing options. Let me be real here. Undoing the deep legacy of segregation in our community is the hardest, most challenging work our city will undertake. We know that overcoming poverty and building opportunity involves three primary components. The first is access to employment, which we are tackling through our efforts with the Office of Community Wealth Building. The second is through improving public education, which is why I've committed to tackling it in partnership with Richmond Public Schools through the Education Compact. The third, and the most challenging, is housing. We know we need more jobs and better schools to improve our neighborhoods, but we also know that unsafe neighborhoods and unhealthy neighborhood conditions can hold people back as they strive and struggle to get ahead. And we know that if we don't directly challenge housing segregation, many of our most successful residents will simply leave the neighborhood and the city as they start to get better jobs in other places. We need to make it possible for our residents to have the opportunity to succeed and stay in Richmond. That means building a new model of affordable housing. The respectful transformation of public housing and the creation of mixed income communities will make all of the city's neighborhoods healthier, wealthier, and safer. We need to develop public policies and reflect the values of equity and justice, and to fund the transformative initiatives that our city so desperately needs and our citizens deserve. It's easy to complain about the ills and challenges the city faces. Heck, it's almost a spectator sport in the city of Richmond. It's much harder to step up, attempt serious change, and stay committed to it. Yes, the challenge will outlast my time in office, and maybe even the lives of some of us gathered here today, but this is worthy work. You know, the best part of my job is visiting our young people. Not that you all aren't great, but I love spending time with Richmond's youngest citizens. They show me there's reason for hope. They are our number one asset, and we must invest in them and in their communities. So ladies and gentlemen, I truly believe this is our moment. I was at an event the other day, and a senior citizen handed me a note quoting Harry Truman. It read, "Men make history, not the other way around." I believe I was elected to make the most of this opportunity for change, to bring people together, and to put this city on the path for better life for everyone. For everyone. One Richmond is meant to be inspirational more than aspirational. Because aspirations don't change lives or pay the bills, but actions do. One Richmond is meant to drive bold actions that are long past due. We have a long way to go, but today I invite you to join me in charting the path toward true affordable housing in the city of Richmond and taking the needed actions to make changes happen. Your presence here today is testament to your commitment and gives me confidence that we will work hard on all the steps necessary to make Richmond one Richmond. And I'll have to end with this. Those who held positions like this and roles like yours have set us up for the greatest comeback. The greatest comeback. There's only up from here. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So we are now going to move into the portion of the day where we ask you all to get to work. A number of people have come up to me and like, you mean we're going to work? We're going to think? We're going to, talk to one another? We're going to plan? I'm like, yeah, this is a working summit. We know the challenges. Now's the time to get to work to chart the path forward. So just a few housekeeping notes, and then I'm going to run over the plan very, very briefly. One, please make sure that your phone is silenced. Once we start working, you're not going to be able to hear it anyway, but if you will silence your phone, I'd appreciate that. Two, make sure you're at your assigned table. As I said, we've made the goal in having a diversity of stakeholders at each table is so that all perspectives are represented in these conversations, because the work is going to be done at the table level. The big lift is going to be done there. Three, we are not taking a break. You can thank me for that, not your facilitator. She's a lot nicer than I am, trust me. That's a low bar, but she is nicer, and she wanted a break, and I said, no, we'll have chocolate on the table. That is a priority. It is Halloween. We need chocolate. There's water, drinks in the back. If you need a bio break, take a break. We're just going to keep rolling. Four, we do have media in the room. You've noticed that. We have print media as well. I've asked that they simply identify themselves as such, and you all can make what you want of your conversations with them, okay? Now let me start with the why a plan. We've been asked that as well. Well, many of you have been in the room for these sessions before. I remember the first time I met Susan Wilkes, Ellen Robertson was in the room too. We did one of these plans a long time ago. And so we felt like it made sense to honor the work that's come before, not ask you to plow ground that we've all plowed before, but give you a point of departure for your conversation. So that's why we start with a plan. The second thing I would say is that the plan is housing-centric. We are well aware, you've heard Greta speak to this issue, the mayor has spoken to this issue. Housing's foundational, but it's not done in a silo. We know it's about schools, it's about jobs, it's about transit, but this is a fairly housing-focused, housing-centric plan. So we're going to start from there. Before I do that, in all recognizing folks and thanking folks, I was remiss in not thanking the elected officials. And so I'm going to try to go through the council 1 through 9 so I don't miss anyone. It's the only way my brain can do it. Andreas Addison is here from the 1st District. Okay, number 2. This is going to be a test. Kim Gray is from the 2nd. Chris Hilbert, President Hilbert from the 3rd. Kristen Larson from the 4th. I feel like I'm in a civics class. Thank you, Greta, for that note. I really appreciate that. You could have done that while you were standing up here. What's with this? I know. I'm not stalling. I know. Parker's here. Parker Agelesto from the 5th. Councilwoman Ellen Robertson from the 6th. Vice President of Council Cynthia Newble from the 7th. I'm on a roll. Reva Trammell from the 8th. And Michael Jones could not be with us, but Hope Elliott, his aide, is with us. So thank you to all of those who have come out as well. We thought it was really, yes, thank you. They're those who deliberate and legislate, so it's important that they be here with us. So thank you all for being here. All right, now I'm going to, we think maybe this works. We're going to find out. Ah, it works. All right. Very quickly, let me run over the goals very quickly, and then I'm going to introduce Susan Wilkes. Goal number 1, respectfully reimagine, redevelop housing. I want to be really clear. This is not a sticks and bricks goal. This is a people-first goal. And I want to share a little vignette, and I do so with the permission of Ms. Felicia Dixon, who's here. You know, we can raise buildings, but we cannot tear asunder the vital, vibrant networks of community and support that exist in our public housing communities. We have to honor those. We have to lift those up. So I asked Felicia if I could share this very briefly. I had the privilege of being at Peter Paul a couple of weeks ago for the Rise and Shine breakfast. What an awesome way to start a week. And Felicia recounted her story. She is the mother, proud mother, I will say, of a working mom. And she has 3 beautiful, beautiful, accomplished children. And she talked about her journey. And she said there was a point, and she happens to live in Mosby, and she said she decided that she was ready to seek full-time employment. And there was another mom who said, you know, I'm not there. I can't do that yet. But Felicia, I will watch your children so you can. And that just gives me chills. But that is what it's all about. And those networks of community and support need to be honored, need to be lifted up. Whatever else we do, we can't tear those asunder as we go about the redevelopment of public housing. So this is a people's first strategy. Goal 2. Well, at the end of the day, we do need to get around to the money. This plan doesn't work unless we fund it. We have to find the resources. Now, housing and urban development's in the room, so I'm not going to suggest we don't want money. We want money. More money, more money, more money, okay? But we also are realistic. We also need flexibility in how we go about the redevelopment of public housing. And certainly the federal government can provide us with greater flexibility so we can be more creative in how we approach that task. We also know that the city government is going to seek funding from the state in 2018 to support the redevelopment of public housing. That's wonderful, but I do not expect either the federal government or the state government to rain down money like manna from heaven, so we have to be about local funding sources. This is our city. We have to be responsible for its transformation, and that means funding it. That's what that goal is about. Goal 3. If we're going to have a mixture of incomes throughout the city, we know that mixed income communities are healthy communities, then we have to preserve the affordable housing stock that we have, and we have to create more of it throughout the city. And goal 4, it's great to have a plan. It'd be fantastic to fund it. We need the right infrastructure in place for it to be executed efficiently and effectively. That's what goal 4 is about. So with that, I am going to turn the rest of the day and your work over to Susan Wilkes. Many of you know Susan. Many of you work with her. For those of you who don't know, I can run down her resume, but let me tell you this about Susan. This is what's important about her. She is smart, kind. She's one of the most generous human beings I've ever met. She has one of the most gentle souls that I've ever encountered, and because of that, she radiates positive energy, and life is too short for anything other than that. And by the way, she is very, very, very good at what she does. So Susan is going to make the most of us and our time together. Please welcome Susan Wilkes.
Good morning. So you can see from your agenda that you're going to be working in small groups. This is really the meat of your work together this morning. And what I'd like to do is to walk you through the task first. You're going to complete 3 tasks at your table, and I'll walk you through those now so that at your table you can work at your own pace. If you need a biology break in the morning, you can just get up from your table when you might need to, and you do have a small group facilitator assigned to your table, and their job is to make sure you get through the 3 assignments that you have at your table. So I'm going to give them all to you. You'll hear me ringing this peaceful chime occasionally in the background. When you hear that, you know that's my signal that you really ought to be moving on to the second task, but you have a little bit of freedom to do it at your pace. We're aware that at your table you may not know everybody, so the first task in about 10 minutes is just an introductory task. So if you could please indicate your name and your work or your role in being here today. And then one word that you would use to describe the state of housing in the city of Richmond now. So this is the current state. And then in contrast, one word that you hope you might be able to use 5 years from now. So if we reconvene this group in 5 years and it was a really different scene in housing, what word would you hope you might be able to use? Your table leader's going to record those on the flip chart. And then we've got a lot of staff here today that as your table finishes one work product, if y'all just raise your hand, someone will come by and sweep that up. We're going to use the back wall as a big blackboard today, and we'll be posting your results. So you won't need to get up. We want you to stay at your table and stay engaged in the conversation. So that's about 10 minutes of introductions. Then each table is assigned a particular goal. Your facilitator will know what goal that you're working on. You're going to have a chance later in the day to vote on strategies across all 4 goals, so don't feel disappointed if you didn't get to comment in the small group work on a particular goal. You'll have an opportunity later. So at your table, you're going to work on one of the goals. The first task is to look at the goal itself and give us some feedback on the quality of the goal. To what extent do you think this leads us towards the vision that we have for the city? Are there any suggestions for alterations of the goal itself? Don't worry about wordsmithing at this point, so just any substantive changes to the goal. You can highlight a few bullet points on the flip chart page, and we are committed to compiling all of your results from today and sending that back to you. So if there was an important thought at your table, make sure it gets on the flip chart, and then it'll get in the permanent record for today. We think that'll take about 10 minutes. And then here's the main task, is to really vet the strategies that have been brought forth on the draft plan. There are some extra copies in the basket at your table if you need to refer to that. But we'd like for you to give us some feedback on how effective you think these strategies are. Do you have suggestions for how those should be altered or adjusted in some way to be even better? You're going to record some highlights from your discussion. And then if your group feels like something has been left out, you have a creative or innovative idea for a new strategy, we'd love to hear about that as well, and you'll be recording that. So your facilitator will be leading you through those tasks. When we come back together, we'll have the opportunity to hear some summary comments from each of the groups. We'll have a lot of work posted across the back of the room, and we'll have the opportunity to vote on which you think are the most effective strategies later on. So any questions about what you'll be doing at your table? In that instance then, I'll turn it over to the facilitators, and you can begin with task 1. This morning, and Sean's going to just hit some themes from the current state and future state.
Good morning, everyone, and great job, great job. A few of the common words that we had for the current, they were fragmented, segregated, inadequate, gentrified. These are some of the common names or adjectives that we use to describe our current state. Future, we were looking at empowered, vibrant, I believe equitable was another one that was pretty common. Another one was inclusive. That was a good one that stood out. Inclusive and integrated was another one.
Excellent. So you can see we have some work to do moving from where we are now to where we hope we will be in the future. I'd like to ask the reporters for Goal 1 to actually physically come up here with us, if you would. So if you were asked to report out for your group, just goal 1. So come on up here and you can kind of stand by the goal 1 flip charts, that way you'll be able to read. So we had 5 tables that we're working on goal 1. And what I'm going to ask each of the reporters to do is, if you will share some highlights, and I ask you to do that in less than 2 minutes, so you probably won't be able to say everything that's on your flip chart, but just give us some highlights, both what you thought about the goal, as well as your strategies. And Sean's going to give you a mic, so Dr. Abula, I think you're up first.
Thank you, Susan. So one of the initial points we brought up was this idea of reimagining and transforming housing to foster economically integrated communities is not necessarily a shared value of our region. And so I think sort of preceding work around this goal is this idea that we all need to be convinced that economically integrated communities are actually what's best for everybody and align around that unified vision. So a couple of other thoughts around the goal itself. So is it a shared value? We really almost need a marketing campaign to talk about the importance of social cohesion across race and class, and for the region to rally around that. We talked about the fact that this process needs to be person-centric. Specifically when we talk about public housing redevelopment, Richmond's history and examples all over the country are full of processes that have not really tracked the people who are at the center of that move very well. And so we reminded ourselves that the people who are most affected by this redevelopment, the folks who are being asked to move out of their current homes into new developments, have to be equal partners in the process. They have to be engaged from the very beginning, and they have to have some agency over the next steps that are to take place. I'll stop there and off.
Great. Mr. Albert Walker from Bon Secours.
Okay. In order to know where we're going as a goal, we wanted to add to economically, we want to add socially and racially integrated neighborhoods. We wanted to be very specific about naming what it is that we wanted to see. In terms of the number 1, A strategy, we really wanted to see an enhanced education campaign around educating the community, but also building community agency. 1B, we were really looking at family transition coaches. We thought that was great. We need to continue that. We need to beef that up and scale it up. But also we wanted to add family transition coaches for developers. Because we feel like there are developers who don't really understand what's going on and really need to have some more help with the real issues here. So we need coaches for developers and other folks. Also support the increase of housing trust vouchers. We want to maximize those vouchers so that families have real choice. 1D, we want to add inclusionary zoning, legislate that, and be very intentional and serious about that in future developments, but also using those family transition coaches for the other developers who currently have properties. And then finally, we decided that we would take 1E and break it out and really support the implementation of the transit plan, but also give a nod to education.
Awesome, thank you. And I'll remind you that you're going to have the chance to vote on these later, so if you didn't print out the plan and bring it with you, the yellow copy's in your basket. You might be taking some notes, thinking about these things as we go. Reggie Gordon up next.
Thank you. So I'll just go down the chart here of what we discussed. There was a rich discussion at our table. Incentivize mobility towards struggling communities. Engaging the whole region in the conversation. Yes, this is Richmond proud, Richmond centric, but this does require connectivity with the contiguous counties, obviously. Vision that can't be limited to public housing. So the communities we should think about housing just not for people that live in Fairfield or Creighton, but in the neighborhoods that abut them. Building the human capital, be more explicit about the people and the goals that we're articulating today. Integration of is economic, but also racial, cultural, and social integration. The possibility to be a different place, grounded in goodwill. There's a lot of conversation in this room, but we know that there's several citizens in Richmond who want to make this happen. So encourage that. Just keep supporting that goodwill is at the foundation for the majority of us, we hope, in this community. Be more explicit on how we build safety. Recognize the impact of extreme poverty. Pushing poverty out into substandard housing isn't progress. This is, it's not success to have someone leave Creighton and go into Eastern Henrico to housing that is fragile or tentative. So we need to be obvious about looking at where we're asking people to go, where there are options that might not be helpful. And then finally, maximize public housing limits with steps up and work requirements. The concept of Ms. Jones, Mr. Jones, you have 5 years to live here. But meanwhile, the community is going to get you ready from employment to transportation to education, and connect you with, let's use home, so that you can find affordable housing somewhere that developers created in Richmond. So we all are part of a defined time period, and we work collectively and collaboratively with those individuals and families.
Good morning. A few additional thoughts that haven't been mentioned yet. We saw an opportunity with the language to really, we explicitly define safety as a good outcome, and then we use this general word called benefit, or what benefits. And so being more explicit there. We also had a good conversation around the word all. Does that all describe all the residents, or is all really all of us, the entire city? So what is the benefit just to the residents as we transform those communities, but what's the benefit to the city at large, to the region at large when that work happens? As far as the goals, we talked a bit about transition does not always mean leaving the neighborhood. So what does it look like to make investments in place versus the balance of actually transitioning out of the neighborhood? We also mentioned, as we said, having an explicit strategy for safety. The final one is there's unity around advocacy and creating this connection between industry, nonprofit, housing, residents, really thinking about advocacy towards policy. And how that then can transition to some kind of oversight and accountability for those who are doing this work.
Hi, I represent Table 20. I'm Mary Kay Goldschmidt, and I was told to make it fast and just use the things that haven't been mentioned already. So I'm going to tell you the few that haven't been mentioned. One possible addition to Goal 1, remove the structural disincentives for moving up and out of public housing. So it makes it a viable option for residents, meet them where they are. Respectfully includes inclusion, involvement, and input, respectfully meaning the wording of the goal. We talked about the possibility of a tax incentive, City of Richmond, working with our more impoverished residents and reimagining what that might involve. Workforce housing. Strategies need to be broadened to address the neighborhood around public housing and the importance of balancing new and rehabbing existing properties, and the significance. We think reimagine is a terrific word, and we like that a lot. I think that's everything.
Great, thank you, Mary Kay. Let's have a collective round of applause for this. To Goal 2 in a moment, but I'm wondering if there's questions for clarification. Other tables, as you started thinking with them about Goal 1, did you have a question or a comment? Sean's got a microphone, and there are also microphones in the back. Question or comment on Goal 1, any of the results so far? All right, then let's get the reporters for Goal 2 up front. And like before, you'll just be hitting a few highlights in a couple of minutes. I think you're up first. Oh, Sean's.
Okay, Goal 2. I'm going to be super brief. We felt like even though we're talking about money here, money can get complicated. It is critically important to maintain the resident voice in all of these conversations. we have to respect and incorporate the informal networks that exist in communities, incorporate that into all of our funding plans. With respect to capital investment, we've got to have a common North Star, and that North Star might lead us 50, 60, 70 years out, but we've got to just be ready to be in this for the long haul. And then lastly, making sure that we're focusing on funding that's beyond public housing. We have swiftly gentrifying communities. We've got to make sure that there are supports, financial supports that enable residents to age in place and to stay in the communities that they've been a part of for generations.
I'm going to hit the goal to South. I'm Beth Stewart from the Virginia Housing Development Authority. I'm going to stick to our goals that were high level, since I'm seeing a lot of the goal to repetition here, so everybody can get through some strategies. We talked about the need for a very comprehensive investment strategy. That way we can tie the larger housing plan goals that go beyond public housing communities to the broad affordable housing goals of the city. But it's got to be delineated on a realistic time frame, and with also the finances known, so that the city knows how much that investment is going to cost over a long term. We did tie some of this goal also to goal 4, which is the operations of the city. It's really critical to understand where the drivers are coming for, the development costs, because the city has a role to play in multiple different avenues, as well as the developers and the nonprofit community, and then ensuring that the people part flows into the investment strategy as well.
Good morning, I'm Dave Belty with Funds for Richmond, and our group talked long and hard about the incentives we need to create for all funders to align together and create structures together that are intentional and very specific. And we particularly talked about how important it is to use data to do that, and to target our work and to prioritize our work, so that we're not everywhere at all the time with all people. I think that's the high level conversation we've had, and when you're willing and ready, you can take a look at some of our other specific activities. Thank you.
Good morning, I'm Ebony Walden, and I'm representing Table 7, Goal 2. We talked a lot about, it says the options for all citizens, and what actually that meant, and how we should have some way to prioritize, in the spectrum of affordable housing, where are we going to be focusing these funds, and how are we going to be prioritizing that? Is it public housing? Is it 50% or below? Is it 80% or below? Is it up to 120%? And so some way to prioritize that, but to focus on who needs that investment the most, and those populations that are going to fall through the cracks and won't be able to find housing. We also, like Team 1, talked about the need for inclusionary zoning, so that affordable housing is not just something that is built by the affordable housing community, but there's affordable housing incorporated in the market rate development. We talked about what is the definition of transformation of public housing communities. How can we define that so that it's clear around what that means? There was particular strategies 2A, E, and F that were similar to strategies we thought that you would need to sort of fund and complementary funding for the school systems. And so we wanted to make sure that those things weren't competing, but complementary efforts, because we also need mechanisms to fund our school system. And the other thing is the need for long-term dedicated funding sources. So something that's going to last 10 plus years, that is just not the new thing. And I think last question about whether TIF funding was, tax increment financing was actually a viable option, I think. And the other thing was a graduated process, funding a graduated process for public housing in different stages, and funding the services to come around that towards self-sufficiency.
I'm Natalia Artis, and I'm with Union Banking Trust. I'm your community development banker, and I'm here representing Table 19 on Goal2. So I had the easiest job because everybody already covered most of the issues, but we just want to get a question on the goal where we're mentioning the word citizens, and then we wanted to remember to consider the housing needs of all city residents. Some people might be in transition for the citizenship. We also had a representative for the HUD, Joe, in our table. So of course we talk about the RED potential and some LIHTC expansion to match the local funding stream with the longevity requirements, and the economic development paired with the housing or options, which would include public housing, rental, and home ownership. So it's kind of having a way of partnering housing and matching housing with jobs.
Great. Thank you, Paula. So questions or comments on Goal 2, perhaps at your table? Yes. Let's wait till Sean gets a microphone to you.
All right. Hi. I have a question, I guess, for some of our other tables who dealt with Goal 2, because I've heard these words a number of times, and I hate assumptions that we're all on the same page in terms of what words mean. I've heard the words inclusion, I've heard the words intentional, and the terminology very specific. And I'd like to know if someone could just please clarify what exactly are we referring to. I would argue that the housing conditions as they are were absolutely intentional and deliberately specific. So if we can define what we mean a little more in terms of what those things are in relationship to the capital investment goal.
Yeah, and Laura, would you flip back on the slide so that we have Goal 2 in front of us? We can all look at that together. And as I heard the request, it was for one of the other tables that was discussing Goal 2. He'd like to hear how you all were defining these terms. Or anyone, it doesn't have to be from Goal 2. All the way back to goal number 2, Laura. There you go. And the particular words were inclusion, intentional, and specific.
I'll talk about inclusionary zoning. So that's a particular practice by which developers that are developing market rate housing would actually either have to include affordable housing in their developments or contribute to an affordable housing fund. So that's a way to get affordable housing from the private market, or to get some dollars in lieu of building affordable housing, so that there's a diversified funding, so the public sector and the nonprofit sector aren't the only ones contributing to affordable housing. So that's a specific definition for a zoning mechanism to diversify housing funds for affordable housing.
Others that might like to comment on one of those words, inclusion, intentional, and very specific, and what your group is all about. Wouldn't mind standing up so we can hear you, and Sean's going to bring you a microphone.
Well, for us, anytime we talk about a goal in general, it has to be specific, right? It has to be specific so it can be measurable. So I think that's when we're talking about specific, whatever the goals are, making sure that to drill down and have a specific goal there, and so that down the road, because the talk has been 10, 15 years, decades to get this done. And if you don't know where you are and where you're going, and I'm specific about it, you can never measure it, so how do you know if you're getting there? So that's what we used.
Great, thank you. And how about intentional? Comment about how your group was thinking about that word and using that a bit.
I just would want to put a shout out to Danny Abula's editorial where he talked about gentrification as unplanned growth. And I think to the extent that we want to tackle gentrification, we need to be intentional and planned about doing it. So that was the genesis of using that language of planned and intentional.
Thank you. Any other questions or points on Goal 2? Anyone wants to ask or make? Great, if I could have the representatives from Goal 3 come up front then. Kind of moving into this. Oh, yes. Applause for Goal 2. And then as before, we'll
about 2 minutes of comments from everybody. I think Renee, you're up first. If you wouldn't mind introducing yourself first.
Good morning. I'm Renee Pulliam, and I'm here representing the Virginia Apartment Management Association. And our goal, I'll just reread it here, is stated to ensure the preservation of mixed income communities by preserving and increasing the number of affordable housing units, both rental and owner occupied throughout the city. And we actually spent a little bit of time before getting into our strategies talking about perhaps rewording the goal to state encourage the development of and preservation of mixed income communities and carry on from there. We had some discussion about mixed income, and does that mean mixed income to include low to moderate income with market rate? Or many mixed income communities are mixed income levels within low to moderate income. So that can go in a couple different directions. But what we wanted to focus on were some of the strategies to incentivize the creation of additional affordable housing units. And we feel pretty strongly that the existing incentives that are in place to incentivize development of affordable housing units that are being used right now, perhaps developers need to be part of the discussion on what incentives would actually make these deals work. Because as most of us all know in this room, the development of affordable housing is very expensive, and available funding on projects gets cobbled together from many different sources in order to make these things work. We also talked about creating communities where all residents want to live, not necessarily just those who need the affordable housing, but all across the spectrum to enhance the development of communities across the board, and the infrastructure that needs to come with that outside of the community itself. We didn't go too far down the rabbit hole, but the educational components and things that impact whether people want to live in a certain community. We also talked about the limiting of real estate tax for longtime owner occupants in their homes, so that as the housing levels increase and gentrification, things like that, that the other groups have talked about, we don't have individuals that have been in these communities for a long time want to leave. We discussed the development of TIFs and expansion of those programs as well. And then finally on code enforcement, ensuring that code enforcement is done equitably and focused on health and safety, with the mindset that many individuals living in existing conditions that may have violations of local codes may not have the money to improve their conditions, and so possibly having grant money available for them to be able to do that.
Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Emily Weavering. I'm from the Federal Reserve Bank of Richmond. I'm here representing Table 12. So the previous group hit on many of the conversation points that we had as well, so I'll be very brief in building on those comments. First and foremost, we really wanted to highlight that while this goal specifically talks about mixed income communities, the conversation about mixed income communities and the conversation about public housing are not two separate conversations. That is one conversation that needs to happen cohesively. So when we're talking about mixed income, we're also talking about public housing and how we're developing all types of housing in the city of Richmond. So then I'll also just pull out that we really felt that it is crucial to focus on both rental and home ownership. So of course we have a significant rental population in the city. So when we're talking about mixed income, it needs to be affordable rental properties as well as affordable housing. So with regard to the particular strategies, we talked about just how 3A is absolutely essential to even forming any sort of affordable mixed income community. And then we really dove into 3B. We talked about how 3B appears to be rather politically feasible. So it's it seems like it's a strategy where there could be some movement on that. And it's also just critical for sustainability of mixed income communities and for aging in place. Similar to the previous group, for 3C, we talked about the need to be sensitive in code enforcement and really build up the resources for folks who don't have the resources to necessarily respond to code enforcement issues, and then also being strategic about code enforcement in vacant properties where there are landlords who are absentee landlords. And then we talked about 2 additional strategies, the first being capacity building for additional affordable housing developers in the city. There's awesome work going on in the city around affordable housing, but increased capacity is a good thing. And then we also talked about, as has been mentioned before, just increasing the constituency and really expressing to people why it's important to have mixed-in communities, and really communicating to people why that's a good thing for everyone in Richmond.
Let's hold our applause till we hear from all of Group 3.
Hey, I'm Omari. I'm a housing advocate in the city. We had goal number 3, and we initially were focused on the development, like some of the other representatives that came up here, but we ended up feeling similar to what Table 12 felt, and felt that it's not a separate conversation. Public housing and mixed income developments. Some residents of public housing pay more rent than I do, so we already have some mixed income communities in the city. As far as 3A, we spoke about incentivizing new developers to include affordable housing units, using a zoning requirement easing. However, at times the city's processes tend to hinder developers from doing that. That was brought up at our table. We discussed that there needs to be a serious discussion regarding requiring acceptance of housing choice vouchers at existing and future developments. It was said that that's kind of become the new face of segregation and the new concentration of poverty, as fewer landlords accept housing choice vouchers and they're able to deny them. So that was a discussion that needed to be had. We didn't really go too much over 3B, which was with the 10-year, I don't remember, but yeah, we didn't go too much over 3B. We did skip to 3C, and we leaned a lot on Laura's sentiments at the beginning regarding honoring the existing neighborhoods and preserving the cultural and social ties that are there. It was brought up more resident engagement in the code enforcement process. There was 2 recommendations that were brought up from a city audit in 2010 that suggested more residents be involved in code enforcement. There be a volunteer-based group set up to alleviate some of the burden on code enforcement and to get more resident input in that process.
Thank you.
My name is Ronnie Johnson, and I'm from 100-Fold International, and I spent the last 7 years working for the City of Richmond in economic and community development, representing Table 18. A couple of things that we just like to highlight is that I learned a lot at this table related to that public housing in particular, that they're neighborhoods. And that one of the things that we need to be careful, be strategic about is as we deconcentrate, we talk about this issue of deconcentrating poverty, that we think in terms of neighborhood. If you just move someone to another community and they don't feel that, and they have been in this community, that could be disruptive to the family. We also talked about schools, because even in our existing communities, it's going to take, it's a generation for us to move from into this mixed income environment. And so the existing schools that service our public housing community, we need to spend some time in that arena. And then finally, well, purpose-built. People have talked about mixed income, and what our goal was is that they would be purposely built. They would be across social economic boundaries. And we came up with a formula: 1/3 low, 1/3 mod, 1/3 market. We were honored to have at our table Ms. Ivy Bell, who is actually one of the tenant leaders at Wickham, excuse me. And we asked her the question, what would a mixed income community look like to someone that lived in public housing? And she's going to take about 60 seconds to respond to that.
Good morning. Good morning. Okay, so what I got was, when it was asking me what mixed income look like, it'll be affordable housing for everybody. Single families, duplexes, multifamily homes, secure rental programs where they can rent or own their homes, affordable grocery stores, improved schools, public transportation, because everybody doesn't drive, a community garden, activities for the youth, job access, and a playground.
Thank you. Let's give her a round of applause.
Hi, I'm Marion Cake. I'm with Project Homes, representing Table 10. I believe I'm the last of Goal 3, so you can feel free to applaud when I'm done. I'm just going to add two things. One, we felt the need to specifically identify mixed income as including public housing residents, to just come out and say it and be very clear with that. With the code enforcement, we would like to see more emphasis on the processing of these properties that have title issues that have to go through tax delinquency, and really get at the root cause of the blight with the code enforcement issues. That was all the other things we had.
Applause. So while we're thinking about goal number 3, we'll go ahead and take any questions or comments. People at other tables that weren't working on goal 3, do you want to ask anything or chime in on something?
Good morning. I would like to know that once a person is moved out of public housing, like if they have a family plan or an individual plan, is there any type of plan to help them with the adjustment to living in another environment with regards to just getting along with someone that they hadn't been around, you know, another race, another economic structure, just some kind of support, or once they move out of public housing, are they just thrown into the real world?
Great question. Which of the tables did anyone have a conversation about that piece of it?
Well, I think that's what the transition coaches, the whole plan of the transition coaches in public housing and what they're currently doing with Creighton is helping residents to make that adjustment. You know, it's not so much living in different areas, but making adjustments of credit worthiness, talking about those needs that the family has, whether it's health needs, support needs, and so that's the whole plan. How do we work with residents, not just around the bricks and mortar, but how do we work with them around their life and the quality of life and improving it?
And I would say beyond that, we understand that moving is not the point alone. It's putting families on a complete pathway to self-sufficiency in a lasting way, and that's the Office of Community Development goal that they've embraced. But also, as Carol said, the transition coaches, and one thing that I would mention is that the framework for the choice application that we put in required the city and the housing authority to track residents for years afterwards and keep up with them unless they move, completely left the community. So that's a kind of specific goal with teeth that we can embrace locally as a community to go forward, to understand that, you know, as the question asked, we have to support the family, not just if they move, but afterwards, because we don't want, it's a big risk to move, and we don't want any situation where a family has moved and they end up being worse off because the support was not there. That we have to anticipate that in prevention, and that's going to require a resource investment to make it happen.
Great, thank you. Good morning, everyone. My name is Lily Estes. I just want to have an overall aha moment inclusion here, and that when we're talking about how public housing residents need to be involved and how well-meaning people want those public housing residents to be involved, there's a basic piece that is never actually addressed, and that is the HUD regulation of tenant participation that allows the tenant to be intricately involved in every aspect of public housing operation, and that's never given to them by the tenant council leadership or supported by the housing authority management or the well-meaning non-public housing people who make up rooms like this. So I would encourage us as we go forward to authentically, intentionally, and inclusively look at the 24 CFR Code of Federal Regulations. Everything housing on the national level, whether it's affordable housing, Section 42, or whether it's Section 3, 135, any money coming from federal into any entity comes under the 24 CFR. And if we're going to be serious about what this city want to do to build inclusion and transform this city, where the least of us is involved in the planning all the way through the maintenance, then we need to be very serious about the intentionality of that. Right now, I don't see public housing people included, no matter how many times, you know, we say we are. You know, because as we move from this day, we need to be able to see timeline benchmarks, inclusion of income increase, community engagement, you know, consistently. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, so we're, I don't know, so I was waiting for the microphone. I didn't know this, whether they were here first. Yeah, so we did touch on some of what she was asking about as far as that transition from public housing and into new neighborhoods. And it was mentioned that it actually kind of touches on what Ms. Estes was talking about. And we thought it was important to learn from the mistakes of what happened with the remodeling of Blackwell. And although, you know, residents were supposed to be tracked, as Thad said, a lot of those residents are now unaccounted for, and 45% of the residents from Blackwell were dispersed throughout other public housing units in the city, and 23% of them were pushed out to Henrico, 13% went to Chesterfield, 5% went to Hanover. So we really need to keep all of those mistakes in mind, and the lack of tenant participation that Ms. Estes was talking about that went towards that process. That is what resulted in a lot of displacement for residents. So right now, as the plan is to basically eliminate most of the current housing stock in the city as far as public housing, we kind of need to think about that, and where are these residents going to go if there is not currently affordable housing right there for them when those new developments take place. So that really needs to be kept in mind as we move forward.
Thank you. We'll hear one more comment, then I know we need to hear from Goal 4 tables as well. Yes.
Good morning. I just wanted to respond to Lily's comments. You know, I love you, Lily, but I do agree with you for the most part. There have been efforts, but I think a great takeaway would be, you know, we need to get better at the Housing Authority at collaborating with residents in the community. And so, you know, a takeaway for me will definitely be, you know, to work with our CEO, TK, and the rest of the Housing Authority commissioners to make sure we, and with laser focus, show when we try to make attempts and then fix those failed efforts. Because there have been attempts, and I keep hearing this over and over again. So obviously, we're not doing a good enough job, but I'd like to make this a takeaway for us to make this whole situation better. And we do need the residents.
Thank you. With Goal 4, we divided that into 2 parts because there were multiple strategies. So if I could have the table representatives from Goal 4, strategies A through C, come up front. And again, we're just taking 2 minutes or less to hit a couple of your high points. Lynn, would you like to model brevity for us?
You betcha. I just want to say that Goal 4 is the least sexy of all the goals and strategies. Really, administrative and government structure, ugh. But I think it is where the rubber meets the road, because you can have incredible policies and goals and aspirations and yada, 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 but unless it is actually spelled out and implemented within our administrative structures, nothing's really going to change. So, with that in mind, our table 16, thank you very, very much, really talked about inclusion, and I know that we've used that word time and time again, but really being very deliberate about including all different stakeholders in kind of the setting up of the administrative structures and how those policies and procedures are actually implemented on the ground level. And part of our discussion was a little bit of back to the future. So years ago, some of you may remember, that we had community neighborhood action teams. And they were coordinated teams that involved residents and civic associations, RRHA, and city staff, and they worked on neighborhood issues. And so that all the different constituent groups actually had a say in what was happening in their particular neighborhood. So that might be something that we should actually go back and review and talk about how that worked. Maybe we should, kind of bring it up again and reinstitute it. And to that, we definitely acknowledge that not everybody comes to the table with the same set of skills. So making sure that as we're involving our residents, that people have the opportunity to gain some skills and knowledge about the issues. And where'd my other thing go? Get out of my life. Sorry. Thank you, as if I can actually remember anything these days. And our big takeaway, and I have to give a shout out to Heidi Abbott, she kept saying time and time again, it is the inclusion of resident voice in every level of decision making. Again, we can include residents at the big table conversations, like at this convening, but it really is including people across the spectrum at the departmental level. And just to kind of wrap up our tables discussion, we really talked about, from a city perspective, that the mayor and council makes the policy, but every single department head and all their individual staffs really have to be involved in putting affordable housing at the top of the priority list. And how do you make all those boring, mundane decision-making, how do you make those processes smoother and more efficient? And I said that was the last thing, but it's not, because the city is going through its master planning process right now. This is the guiding document for our city. Affordable housing has to be at the very, very top of that list. And because that's what the Planning Commission uses to make decisions around development, and that's the document that council refers to. So it is really important that our new master plan addresses affordable housing, and that everybody here that is a citizen of the city of Richmond, I encourage you to go on their website. They have opportunities for everybody to be involved in the master planning process. That's my pitch.
Hello, my name is Dan Cohen. I work for the City of Richmond. I'm responsible at the moment for the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. So thank you for this opportunity. I'm representing Table 15. So we agree that the housing and community development department should be separate from economic development, and to add the word housing into the community development would be very strong. We recognize the fact that before we can have a change in structure, we do need a change in policy, as a matter of fact, and those policies need to be drafted and codified. So for example, the city has a consolidated plan that it submits to HUD, yet it doesn't necessarily mention all the other housing policies, like the Housing Trust Fund, for example, or the Community Land Trust, in that document. That would be very important for this city to include. We thought it would be a really good idea if there was a stronger partnership between the city and the Housing Authority, as a matter of fact, and as well as a process to allow public housing residents to transition from public housing to rental units that are privately held and home ownership if possible. We also talked a little bit about establishing some better public-private partnerships, relationships with private sector developers, relationships with the Community Land Trust, and relationships that are stronger with hopefully the coming land bank. And to that end, changing and reforming the process for tax delinquent property disposition, and making sure that every year that there's a certain percentage of those properties that actually perhaps go for affordable housing to the land bank as a way to help stabilize neighborhoods and create mixed income communities. And lastly, we'd like to say we'd like to have a better customer service experience on the first floor of City Hall with respect to permits. I think the city is on its way to doing that, as a matter of fact, and has already made some changes in the last couple of weeks, but we realize that that's probably the first experience that a lot of folks have with the city, and it's recognized that we have to do a bit of a better job. Thank you.
Let's hold our applause to the end.
Good morning, I'm Sam Young, representing Table 14. I guess we're probably more different than anyone else on the first point, which is the separation of community and economic development. We did understand the concept of the focus, but weren't sure of the net result. Maybe creating more of a bureaucracy and potentially competition. But we probably needed a little more information to give good suggestions on that topic. As far as permitting is concerned, you know, we really felt like, yes, that needs to get better. There weren't a lot of comments other than, I think that talent, when the restructure occurs, is going to be number one. You know, maybe the city in rethinking can look at their talent pool. As well as you know, the process and technology. The last one, probably C, had the most, you know, we spent the most time on that. We feel like the city is hamstrung to an extent in terms of the leverage it has to collect the delinquent real estate taxes. And we had some great examples of that, but there was a general agreement that we could probably improve the department, but at the end of the day, there needs to be some sort of advocacy, legislatively, maybe put a package together or whatever so that we could lobby and just go to the state legislator and say, hey, we need more teeth in the code so we can go collect our money.
Thank you, Sam.
Good morning, Andrew Clark with the Home Builders Association of Virginia. Laura told me I had 20 minutes, right? Right? You said that? Yeah. All right, sorry. She scares me, so I'm going to listen to that. I think everybody covered more or less what we talked about. Goal 4, we emphasized the idea of innovative solutions and implementation and approach, not just governmental structure, but focusing on private-public partnerships. I think that was mentioned before. And also, we rephrased it down here to transition to public-private governmental partnership. That way, it's not just kind of the government on its own working on a solution saying, here's what we think will work the best, but we've got kind of open lines of communication between all the stakeholders. So on the strategies, I think we echo the comments that were made before. Separating economic and community development allows the city and staff to focus on each function within its or at least give enough attention to each one of those functions. But the importance, we also talked about the importance of maintaining linkage between those two departments so you don't just have silos working on economic and community development, nobody's talking to each other. permits and inspections. Anybody that knows me will know I can go on for hours about this, so I'm just going to leave it at support. Laura is giving me the hook, that's scary. 4C, fully support for the reasons that were mentioned above. And just want to thank Laura and Greta for inviting our association, which represents the public or the private side of the industry. And we've worked a lot with City Council and Greta and Laura to try to be an active partner on things like talking about new incentives for the development of public housing, which we actually, I will plug, sorry, I know I'm getting the hook. One of the additional strategies, inclusionary zoning has been mentioned a couple times today. One of the ideas that we've been working with is requiring or having on the books at the city a 15-year tax abatement that would have a strong requirement for affordable housing for folks at 50 to 80% AMI. So not just mandating that all developments in the city have that, but actually give a strong financial incentive. The history of Richmond really is centered around the abatement program that City Council pushed forward in, I believe, the 90s before I was here. But that's really played a huge role in the city's revitalization. And if we're talking about affordable housing and kind of proven methods of incentivizing it, we think that would be a strong financial incentive. So thank you, guys.
Thank you. We have a second group of tables working on the ladder strategies in Goal 4. So if you three table reps can come up here, we'll hear from you, Tanya.
Good morning, everyone. Tanya Gonzalez, Sacred Heart Center. And Table 17 kindly asked me to summarize, so here I go. So we talked about the need, or we saw the need to really create a common definition around affordable housing. So what do we actually mean when we're talking about that as part of the One Richmond plan? As we reimagine our city structure, as the prior speakers were talking about, we would like to see it be person-centric, customer service focused, through the lens of racial and social equity. Also integrated and holistic when we consider our city structures and how sometimes they work in silos. And then as planning occurs, as we've already talked about, making sure to center people who are most affected in the reimagining of our city structures, so including voices in planning as well as monitoring and accountability. Then we also had some additional suggestions around the voucher program, the master plan, and the land trust fund that I'll let my group address if there's questions about that. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you. Was there another table that dealt with these ladder strategies on Goal 4? Who was the other table? I think y'all probably had the red marker. Oh, okay. Great. So no one else was on D? Round of applause. Questions or comments on goal number 4? Any of the strategies that anyone wants to say anything about?
There were one comment related to private investment on incentivizing 80% and 50% of AMI. What we learned at the table was that in the public housing arena, most of the folks are 30% of AMI. And so I just throw that out to say that we need to think about including that if we're going to have a comprehensive and holistic approach to it.
Thank you, Ron. Anyone else?
I wanted to go back to one of the things our table talked about. We talked about a person-centric or customer service approach. You know, all of us have examples of companies or places we've gone and bought things that had we had a fantastic customer experience. I think our group wanted to challenge the city, whether it's City Hall, whether it's the Housing Authority, to really spend some time thinking about who are their customers and what is their experience. That could be the developer who has an experience. In the city, it's the taxpayer who has the experience. Or it could be the person who lives in public housing. What is their experience? Is that the customer experience we want people in the city to have? So I'd encourage everyone to think about that customer experience side.
Thank you. Anyone else that would like to make a comment? Long walk for you, Sean.
I only want to say there's a lot of I want to go back to Lily's comment because I think it's really important that we really truly honor and respect the families that we most directly are speaking of making change for. There was a time when we used to intentionally make sure that we put in our budget, and this is a funding that provided for the support, leadership, and guidance of families that lived in our public housing communities and in our census tracts that represented a large portion of families that were extreme low income. We actually put money in the budget to provide resources so they could bring their own attorney, their own advisor that would help them with architectural kinds of things, their own advisors that would help them with putting out public policy recommendations to folk that make these kinds of decisions. And during those times, we had some of the most strongest, effective tenant council and community organizations. And so I would encourage the city. It is one thing to tell people to get involved and to do things. When folk don't have the resources to be able to do that, they are limited. And so if we're serious about having that voice, and I will assure you, the absence of that voice, we are not going to get this right. We won't get this right. And so having that voice at the table also means that we need to collectively, public and privately, provide some resources that is there to help organizations within those communities create viable voices with people that can assist them with resources of their choice to be able to make concrete recommendation back to the folk that ultimately will make the policies and carry out the process of implementation of this plan. And I want to thank Greta, and I want to thank Laura, I want to thank the mayor and all of the planning team that have put a lot of work in place to make all this happen, and assure you that all levels of government needs to be engaged and support this effort, because we are a people that know that inclusion is a must. Thank you.
I'm going to give you some instructions for voting now, and we would ask you to hang around. It's going to take about 15 minutes for everyone to be able to vote, but we want to have some conversation after that about the results, about what it means, and about what the next steps might be. So at your table, in the little basket is an envelope, and you'll see that there's a slip of dots for each person. There's an orange dot and 4 black dots. We're Halloween themed this morning. And what we're asking you to do is to cast the orange dot for the strategy that you thought was most important this morning, and your black dots are for your next 4 choices. If there was just one that you think is absolutely the best, you could put all 5 of your dots there, or you could spread them out over 5 strategies. So you are voting for the strategies that you think are best. There's one set of voting flip charts over to your right, and there's another set over here to your left. So we're going to take about 15 minutes for you to cast your votes, and then when you hear the chime, you'll know it's time to get resettled for some conversation about the results.
colleague Sean to tell us what's happening on the other side that my old eyes can't see. Up here it looks like we had a whole lot of orange dots indicating the highest priority under Goal 1A, work to enable public housing residents to make successful transitions. So quite a few of you all giving that your very top vote, although every strategy in Goal 1 had some votes. In Goal 2, we're all about 2A as well. What is it? Can you read that one?
Identify a revenue source. Money, 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 money.
Money, 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 money was a real priority for so many of you there. It looks like 3A also got a number of votes, and then we have some spread in Goal 4 on this side. And how about over there, Sean?
Susan, over here, we're looking at Goal 1. It's concentrated on 1B, hire additional family transition coaches. Goal 2, primarily 2A, ID revenue streams and dedicate them to the transformation of public housing. For Goal 3, very concentrated in 3A, increase and enhance incentives for developers to incorporate the ADUs into their projects. And over here, Goal 4C, reform the city tax delinquent sales process, and kind of combination on Goal 4 for G and 4E. Designate the Maggie Walker Community Land Trust as a city community land trust, and ensure 4G to ensure the development and preservation of affordable housing is a priority in the new master plan.
Great, thank you, Sean. So it looks like, Laura, in terms of the draft, that every strategy got at least a couple of votes, but we have some clear energy around particular ones that this group is seeing as a priority. I'm curious if any of these results are surprising to you all, if you would have expected to see something different, or if this is what you might have anticipated. Any comments about the results in the back? If you just stand up and speak loudly.
I think it's fascinating that we had a high concentration on incentivizing development, and from people that I talked to, at least those in public housing, they're often very suspicious about who's going to profit off of their needs, and seeing the incentives. We just need to be conscious of what that might apply to public housing tenants. Secondly, and this is something that was brought at our table that I think is very important. Currently, the incentives do not require for permanent affordable housing. They expire, they roll off. And we need to make sure that if we're going to put taxpayer money into this, it is forever. Because the issue of affordable housing isn't going to go away, right? And we've got to make sure that if it's going to be there, it's there.
Thank you. We've got here, Sean, and then Becky first, and then Carter.
Good morning. This has been a great session, and so I compliment everybody's work, but I do want to caution this last exercise in the word voting, which indicates winners and losers. And so when we look at the dots and where the concentrations of dots are, I get it. I get there's some preferences at play, but I see a lot of passion also reflected in the strategies that maybe didn't have the highest concentration. So I'm really eager to hear about next steps on this, but I don't want to leave some of this behind.
Yeah, thank you. Really good point.
Yeah, I also have a similar point. It kind of makes it, the way the process is, with one orange dot and then all the rest are secondary, kind of makes it seem like, there's only one clear winner. Also, regarding the results, I was a little surprised that there wasn't more support for, 1E, which was the support for the regional transit plan that's been talked about a lot in the city. We didn't have that goal at our table. We were focused on goal 3, so we didn't cover that. But I think that the regional transit plan is going to have to be at least kept in mind as we consider the outcomes to poverty deconcentration, which essentially is going to, if we don't have enough affordable housing in the city to for those residents that are going to be displaced. Essentially, residents will be pushed out into the county as they were with the Blackwell remodeling. So the regional transit plan is going to be necessary, or else you're really going to have really isolated and excluded communities out there in the counties, or even in, you know, the concentrations of poverty out there. They're just going to have even less access to resources and jobs and everything else of that nature. So I think that transportation is definitely going to have to be kept in mind, you know, and something's going to have to be put in place prior to those developments taking place.
Great, thank you. Here.
Hi, just to note on Councilman Agelasto's comment on the incentives for developers and the concern that some folks may have on who is profiting, you know, in the process. I just can't emphasize enough how scarce funding can be to put together a deal in order for affordable housing to even be built. So perhaps the word incentive may be a semantic thing, but you know, there are developers in this room that I know that have deals that would not have been possible had it not been for the Affordable Housing Trust Fund or other similar programs. It's just the reality. So, you know, I just want to caution people from getting, you know, concerned about the big developer that's coming in and profiting. They're creating sustainable, long-term affordable housing that the residents in this city need.
Thank you. Anyone from over on this side like to make a comment? Here, right here in the middle and then in the back.
I really appreciate how deeply we've gone with housing, but I also want to raise Seth's point earlier and Reggie's work that you and your team do every day, which is to plug this into a greater set of part and whole relationships around self-sufficiency. And so I would encourage us at the right time with the right people at the right place to do this again with this kind of process, with education and, you know, these other really important areas, so that we are intentional about building a part and a whole that's planned, that's structured, that's integrated for Richmond.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. And then Sean, the gentleman in the back there.
Yes, I just want to express great summit. My question is, where do we go from here?
I think I'm going to call up Ms. Laura Lafayette on that note.
Segue for you.
Good, easy segue. We got one more comment first, and then we'll move to next steps.
Good afternoon, morning. My name is Shirley Harvey, and I was the city council person for the city that had most public housing in it, in the 6th district. I'm afraid that this is not going to work, especially for the people, if the people are not here, and they're not here today. If you're not going to have a meeting where you include those people, you're going to find that the situation may be detrimental for them, and they will really have no say-so. If you're going to do this, or you're going to try to do something to help them, I can give you lots of ways to help them so that they can actually afford housing that is not affordable. But you know, the government doesn't seem to hear that. They just seem to want to take from these people and put them wherever they want to. Like, you don't have any say-so because we are over you, you have no money, and so I can put you wherever I please. And I think that's wrong without including them in this conversation. And if you go forward without them, you know, something else is going to happen, because it's not going to happen well if you don't include them.
Thank you. I think we're taking that away as a really strong theme from today. Yes, sir.
I'm really encouraged by this conversation. I was going to make the same exact quote, was I don't want to see this process happen in the public housing neighborhoods. I want to see them as part of this process, discussing all the points as we did. And also voting. I think I want to see what their priorities are and what they see as their interest pieces, because it might be completely the same or very vastly different. And that difference is what we need to understand and explore. And I think this is a great first step in understanding what we need to do. This room is filled with people that can do all the things we want to get done. But I think this engagement needs to happen with those who are going to be impacted the most, and let them have a voice as part of this process as well.
Good. So clearly one of our next steps around how do we engage residents. And any last comments before we get Laura to talk about other next steps? Yes, sir. Right here in the middle.
The one other comment is I completely agree with the engagement of residents. I think we're all convinced of the problem, but there's plenty of people who have resources, have influence, who are not convinced of the problem. And so what is our dialogue with the city at large, what is our dialogue with the region at large around this problem? And so while we're engaging residents with what they want and what they need, also letting people know this is real. And when we improve a place like Creighton, when we improve the East End, that's good for the whole city. This is not just good for the residents. This is not just about helping them, this is about helping all of us. So what does that look like? What does that engagement look like? Is that a PR campaign? Is that a website? Are there conversations? Are there meetings? I think it's all of those. But it's really helping people see this is good for all of us. This precedes all of us, right? This is a legacy that we've inherited. And by tearing down that legacy and building something better for our city, that's good for everyone.
Great, thank you. Then right here and then in the back. Yes, here first.
Okay, so I just wanted to remind us that we're dealing with the outcome of structurally and systemically racist policies. And so it's important to remember that even in 2017, we're still dealing with those issues. And it's important that as we continue to plan on ways to move forward and transform, that we don't forget that racism and other isms are still a part of the fabric that we exist in within society. And so it's going to be so important that as we move forward with these conversations, that we become very truthful and transparent about the assumptions and biases that we hold individually and collectively, and start to have these conversations within our homes, within our workspaces, within our private and public spaces. And so it's so important to understand that even though we talk about history as something back then, we're still dealing with the remnants today. And it's important to understand that we have to make sure that we address appropriately the biases and stereotypical assumptions that we make about certain populations that have continued the demise and the insidious nature of the public housing communities that we see and live in. I grew up in one in Hillside Court, Richmond, Virginia, and I can't tell you, even as a child, the impact that it had on me, perceiving that others perceived me and us in a certain way, where we were not a part of this type of conversation and dialogue, but we were not a part of the city. So it's so imperative, I think, that we make sure that we check ourselves and check each other and check our structures and policies and systems to ensure that we're making sure that our people, our families, our children are really at the center. It's important that we say it, but sometimes it's often rhetoric. And so I really want us to embrace the fact that we have to make it real. So I'm a student at VCU and I'm using our slogan, make it real. And so it's really, really important on a very serious note that we make sure we really do check ourselves and have important dialogue about the biases and assumptions that we make about each other, ones that are not like ourselves, ones that are different, people who live in different communities, and understand that it's all about humanity, and when one succeeds, we all should succeed. Thank you.
So I'm really grateful to go behind Osita because she just eliminated my need to develop a frame for a lot of what was just shared. So I appreciate all of what you shared, says all of it. And what I would add then is if we understand what she said, and for those of us who just applauded, then what we need to be clear about is that those assumptions, those biases, that racism and its legacy are inherently tied into some of the goals, some of the strategies that we've had outlined that we just voted for. So we need to be really clear about where those things are, for lack of a better term, interwoven, and then have what I consider to be a much more substantive dialogue around how do we genuinely deal with these things. We can't do it in a pressure cooker conversation. We can't do it just because you have the decision makers in the room. We can't do it just because we have investors in the room. We can't do it just because we have at least from my glance, less than a handful of people who I would argue represent the community in the room. We have to be able to do it in a very measured but very strategic, very tactical way that includes residents, as everyone seems to have echoed and nodded in agreement with, but also develop a plan that is real in the context of being able to attack those things structurally that Osita outlined. If we don't deal with those things in a real conversation and develop real dialogue around them, then we'll all just simply leave enforcing an agenda that has already been imposed, and we believe that we've had some say-so, if you will, in helping prioritize it in the context of a plan.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm not going to ask you all to close your eyes, but I want you to imagine 40 years ago that the Richmond Redevelopment Housing Authority implemented Section 3. And persons in the community benefited from the contractors that come in and do the work, that they were trained to do these various crafts, that they were taught to be self-managers of their own properties. And these properties today were run by persons who were at one time public housing residents that lived there, that had moved on and their lives had improved. There's laws on the books that demand that, and that has not happened. I worked at the Housing Authority for a long time. I was there when TK was there. TK is good at what he does. We were across the street from one another. He was in a higher pay grade than I was, but the Housing Authority was different when he came back than when he left. And we have allowed these communities to slip. I have worked on everything from inspecting houses being built to turning units. And there has to be accountability, not only on the residents, but on the staff. And I take it both ways. It's a double-edged sword. I should not turn a unit and get a trash bag full of roaches, because the reason that is, that resident should not have been able to live there, because everybody on that row has to have roaches. It's not unaccountability, and we have to make the units accountability, the persons in these units accountable, and we also have to make the staff accountable to uplift these people. And I say this and shut up. I remember, I won't say the name, a lady that was living in public housing, Gilpin Court. She was paying 20-something years ago, $800 a month rent. She worked at Philip Morris, and she didn't want to take advantage of this program, and I asked her why. And she says, well, if I lose my job, she's almost ready to retire. If I lose my job, my rent will always go back. That's not a mentality that needs to be in public housing. An upliftment mentality needs to be there. We rehabbed a home for her on Rogers Street. Her rent was $300 a month less than she was paying in public housing. We sold a house for $1 and completely rehabbed it. There's many ways to help, but if we don't really want to help, if we want to look at them as those folks in public housing, then we got a problem. Thank you.
Thank you. We want to honor the time commitment today, so I hope this is just the beginning of many ongoing conversations. And Laura, you want to talk a little bit about what those next steps might be?
Do you have a slide that's in there? I don't think that's on. Oh, that's not on? Okay. So is there a slide or not? Oh, perfect, next steps. So I'm going to just walk through the logistical next steps, and then Greta is going to come up and offer what will be, I will call the Great Commission for our time, okay? So what will happen is, and let me just pause and say thank you once again for coming. I look out over this room, and as the mayor said, picking it, talking about what doesn't work in our city is one of our favorite pastimes in sports. I can say that I'm a native, lived with it for 52 years. This is a better place than the place I was born. This is a better place than the place I was raised. This is a better place than it was 10 years ago. And it's better because of folks like you who have given of your time and have given of your talents. And this isn't the last conversation we're going to have, but it's been an important one to have. And so I am grateful and humble to be able to be in your presence today. And I thank you once again, and I think you all deserve your own round of applause. And everyone who knows me knows I hate applause, so that was big of me to do that. So next steps. Again, it's important that everyone is heard and their voices are heard, and I hear what Becky is saying about voting, so let's call it preferences. But let me just say what we're going to do. Everything that has been put up on the walls, and if you have any written comments at your table that you want recorded, everything will be recorded. God bless my colleague, Catherine Burke, if she can read your writing, it will be typed up. So all the comments you made about where we stand and where we'd like to be in 5 years, that will be recorded. All the goals, comments on the goals, all the strategies, the new ones, all recorded. We will then record the dots, the preferences, so folks can just see where there was momentum. And I understand there's passion where there might not be as many dots, okay? All of that will be faithfully, duly recorded and sent back out to you all, okay? Because this isn't the mayor's plan or council's plan. It has to be our plan. It has to be our path forward. They can't do this alone. They need our support. They need our commitment. They need an unwavering commitment to our collective future. So we will send it back out. We will welcome any more comments, and then eventually we will provide this to the mayor, provide it to council. I hope that you all will share the plan in your spheres of influence. This is a public document. We own it together collectively, for better, for worse. So with that, I'll turn it over to my colleague, and she will do what she does so well. Yes, with great eloquence. I'm building you up. Okay. I'm building you up.
You guys have been fantastic to give up this many hours to be with us today. I want to thank you on behalf of the Planning Committee. I think a lot of good work was done. What we're about to embark on, and this is the first step, is a community-wide effort to do things differently, to have a different outcome for our city. The opportunity is for ordinary people, the folks in this room and a whole lot more, to do something completely extraordinary. And the young lady over here, I loved your words. I loved your comments, because we want to stop focusing on our differences, we have many, and focus on our common humanity. That's what's going to sustain us to be able to do good for all. And what we hope to do, beyond getting the strategies right, getting the goals right, is really in short order to launch a political campaign with you as disciples that will go out and strengthen the political will to support our elected officials to help us identify and secure new revenues to implement the priorities that we have begun to lay out today. There has been research done over the last few months that says there are resources, funding resources available to us. And while we appreciate the support from the federal government and the support from the state government, I refer back to one of my favorite songs by Billie Holiday, God Bless the Child That's Got His Own. And the resources that are available for the city of Richmond can be put in place by 10 people, our mayor and our 9 city council people. But they won't be able to do it unless we're willing to stand with them for a different outcome for our city and all of our citizens. So as the plan is finalized, please look out for campaign materials and figure out ways that you can get involved. to be able to have a different outcome. I'm excited about it. Now, I've worked in the nonprofit sector for almost 30 years now, and I always see the glass half full. There is something special about this time and place right now. We have leaders in the right position across all sectors to be able to have a different outcome. So I invite you to come be a part with us. It's not going to be easy. We know that. But this change will not occur to uplift people on pathways to opportunity and hope without new resources. And that's what we need to make Richmond the best that it can be for all. And I would just end by saying, let's do this. Thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your Halloween day.